We gather, I open, I receive, I give. And we do it a few times now and stay with what you most need. You can watch me, I will say it a couple of times, then we'll just do the actions, and then in a few moments we'll do it together again. We gather. We are open. We receive. We give. And one last time, together. Together we gather. We are open. We receive. And we give.
Thank you for that lovely prayer, Ruth. And often praying with our bodies can be very helpful, actually, and we're probably so used to words, verbal words, but our bodies also speak. So thank you for that. I'm just going to now introduce a few thoughts about laments, what they are, and how we might use them before we move on to Maureen leading us in a psalm of lament. So a lament, as we've probably already been thinking about, is a language, a prayer addressed to God using the language from our heart. Language tends to be fairly unfiltered. It expresses strong emotion of grief or anger, shame, distress of many kinds. And we allow the words, whether they are verbal, whether they are in art form or body form, to It's a very familiar language in the Bible. As we probably know, many of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. The Bible dedicated to laments, the Book of Lamentations of Jeremiah. But throughout the Old Testament in different places, you will find these prayers of lament, of deep emotion, of distress. So it seems that praying with this sort of language in this way was very familiar to the Hebrew people of the Old Testament. Some laments were personal, some were communal. But as I say, probably familiar to how the people of Israel used to pray. And something that perhaps we are not so familiar with, we've lost that. So I hope that we can reconnect with this ourselves this morning for our personal lament. I suppose one of the aims of a lament is to allow us to express that strong emotion, whatever it might be, rather than bottling it up and pressing it down, keeping ourselves polite. In Psalm 39, the psalmist writes, "I remained utterly silent, not even saying anything good, but my anguish increased, my heart grew hot within me. Then I spoke with my tongue. Show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days." And I'm sure we all know that feeling of bottling up emotion and not letting it out. And then it may well burst out in not very helpful ways. A lament is a prayer to God, and in God there is this form creates a safe space, a place of pouring out lament to a God who loves us and who we trust. And this is several people I noticed in the chat box mentioned safety, mentioned being in a safe place. And this form of prayer creates that safe place because we know that God can cope with all our expressions of emotion, however strong they might be, and that God is not put off. He doesn't reject us or turn a deaf ear to us. He listens and accepts our lament. Frequently, psalms of lament express this deep distress. I'm sure you're familiar with Jesus' words from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" which is from Psalm 22. We might also look at Psalm 64, where it says, "Hear me, O God, as I voice my complaint. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I'm drowning." Sometimes feelings of vengeance might be expressed. "Do not grant the wicked their desires, O Lord. Do not let their plans succeed. If only you would slay the wicked, O God. Take your right hand from the folds of your garment and destroy them." Strong language. Then they might appeal to God for protection and help. "Protect my life from the threat of the enemy," in Psalm 64. Or, "Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Listen to my cry for help. Do not be deaf to my weeping," in Psalm 39. And then psalms of lament might express guilt and shame. "My guilt has overwhelmed me," in Psalm 38. Or, "I know my transgressions and my sin is always before me," in Psalm 51. Feelings of deep remorse. Laments may express deep grief and sorrow. "I am the utter contempt of my neighbors. I am a dread to my friends. My heart is in anguish within me. Oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest." That's in Psalm 55. You can hear the writer's longing just to be able to escape and get away. So psalms of lament contain different elements, grief, and some of the emotions we've been describing. There might be protests, petitions to God for help, and also very often they end with an expression of trust and praise. Many of the psalms recall God's previous help on their behalf and the experiences they've had before of being delivered from whatever trouble they might have been in. And the effect of this is that it helps them to reaffirm their trust in God. So we all know the stories of deliverance of the children of Israel from Egypt. And many of these Psalms of lament will include looking back at some of their history, perhaps their personal history as well, of where God has intervened in their lives. So the language of lament can at times seem quite violent to us when we read them. Many of them, as you know, are written by, many of the Psalms are written by King David, who was a warrior king. And he spent, I guess, most of his adult life either fighting battles or being prepared for defending the nation against enemies. So it's not surprising that he draws on imageries of battles, of enemies, of deliverance. He says in Psalm 44, "You make us retreat before our enemies. My face is covered in shame." Obviously recalling a battle where they were defeated and a shameful experience to him. Many Psalms are also written from the perspective of the children of Israel having broken their covenant with God and appealing to God's mercy. In Psalm 74, they write, "O God, why have you rejected us forever? Why does your anger smolder against the sheep of your pasture? Will you be angry with us forever?" And so the language of lament is drawn from the lived experience of the writer, but also of their community and their history. And then, with few exceptions, these laments end with an expression of hope and trust and praise. And as I found, by expressing the emotion, it drew me into a place of deeper trust in God, of knowing his presence with me. In Psalm 13, we read, I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. Or Psalm 44, I do not trust in my bow. My sword does not bring me victory, but you give us victory over our enemies. So what about us? I wonder what our perspective is. What is your image of God? Perhaps some of these images of battles, of enemies defeated, may seem a little foreign to us. But then maybe our enemies are our thoughts, that perhaps thoughts that keep drawing us back into anxious patterns. Perhaps we wrestle with unhealthy relationships, whether that be with addictions or with relationships with people that are not helpful, with possessions. We find that our hearts keep being drawn back into unhelpful patterns. Perhaps too we are troubled by national and global issues of injustice, inequality, which are bound and we hear about constantly. And of course our medias, our social media and our news media are daily bringing us accounts of all kinds of distress and alarm, which can feed our own sorrows. So just to sum up now about what it is we're doing when we're praying or writing or creating a lament. Firstly, it arises from our relationship with God, however you might see God. God might be male or female. Is God a loving father or mother, a comforting friend, a critical parent, a strict judge? How do you see God? So allow your lament to be addressed to God, and a God that you trust, who you can trust with your deepest emotions, knowing that you can pour them out in a safe place in his presence. The laments will contain elements of petition and protest and praise. The language is unfiltered and honest, and it often might recall the author's past experience of God. And you might want to think of this when you create a lament. It reaffirms the author's trust in God and hope that God will deliver them. And your lament might be personal, but it may also be national or global, addressing national or global situations. So there's just a few thoughts on what a lament might be and how you might create your own lament this morning. So now I'm going to hand over to Maureen, who's going to lead us in a psalm of lament.
We're going to use a particular way into looking at Psalm 43, which is the psalm that we've chosen for this morning to be our portal into Psalms of Lament. And an easy way to remember Lectio Divina, for those of you who are less familiar or unfamiliar with it, is to just use your hand as a kind of a ready guide. The first thing we do is we get ready, we still ourselves, which Ruth beautifully led us in earlier in the morning. And we just slow down and become still. Find a quiet place within or around us. And I'm just going to try and use this screen here. And then we're going to read the psalm slowly. This is the form that the monks one monk would read the psalm in the monastery and the others would hear it. So you can choose whether you want to watch it on the screen as well as hear it, or just close your eyes and allow the psalm to wash over you and wash into you. I will read it slowly twice, and we'll just listen to take it in for the first time. So that's the second movement of Lectio Divina. And a little part of the psalm might light up for you, a word or a phrase. Just take note of it. And then in the second time we read it, you might alight on that word, or it might be something else that comes back to you, to allow God to speak to you through a particular part of the psalm and begin to meditate, reflect. That's the third movement, to reflect on the psalm or the word that's caught your attention. And then you might just take that word into yourself, into a dialogue, and be aware, perhaps it stirs emotions. Maybe it's an evocative word or an evocative phrase. And then for the second part of the morning, we will be looking at responding to that word. We invite you to put your word into the chat box, or the phrase that catches your attention, and then to stay with that word. And we'll talk a bit more about that in how to respond to the word, to rest in the word, and then to return to it. To return to it because you want it to operationalize in your life, to take on meaning and structure and behavior. So that's, become ready. We'll read the psalm, I'll read it for you. Reflect on it to see what arises, what God alights, the Spirit alights on for you. Then we'll respond to that, give creative expression, use it for our lament. Rest in it, take time with it, and then return to it in the small groups. So if you'd like to just draw yourself into a quietness within, and I will begin to read Psalm 43 for you. And when you're ready, any time during this reading, if you would like to add to the chat box, or maybe at the end of the time before we go on to the next part of the morning. Vindicate me, my God, and plead my cause against an unfaithful nation. Rescue me from those who are deceitful and wicked. You are my God, my stronghold. Why have you rejected me? Why must I go about mourning, oppressed by the enemy? Send me your light and your faithful care. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy mountain, to the place where you dwell. Then I will go to the altar of God, to God, my joy and my delight. I will praise you with the lyre, O God, my God. Why, my soul, are you so downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Saviour and my God. In the second reading, to invite the Spirit of God to hover over a particular word or phrase and let it light up for you, or a thought that comes from the psalm that you want to stay with. Vindicate me, my God, and plead my cause against an unfaithful nation. Rescue me from those who are deceitful and wicked. You are my God, my stronghold. Why have you rejected me? Why must I go about mourning, oppressed by the enemy? Send me your light and your faithful care. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy mountain, to the place where you dwell. Then I will go to the altar of God, to God, my joy and my delight. I will praise you with the lyre, O God, my God. Why, my soul, are you so downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Saviour and my God. So we'll allow some time for you to enter into the chat box the particular phrase or thought or word from the third movement of Lectio Divina. So that's the reflection. We've been reflecting on the psalm, what it's saying to you personally. I'm going to come out of screen sharing now. So as you continue to add to the psalm, or add the entries into the chat box, Catherine and I are going to lead us on how we might respond, give creative expression, and through resting and spending time in the psalm, and then and different ways of doing that. So I'm going to screen share a short PowerPoint. Catherine, so you ready to go?
Good morning. I'm going to reflect on using art materials to deepen our prayer and reflect and go into this time of quiet on our own, encountering God. As we've been saying, much soul work, much prayer is non-verbal. It's a wordless place. It's a body of feeling. It's particularly as a lament, something deep within us that we may find so hard to express and make contact with, and we may even worry it will overwhelm us. So a kind of invitation into a gentle time with God and trusting that God leads us in a way that we can manage. But art can reach into these places with God. It's an intuitive approach. And I would say being led by the Spirit in the way that we're looking to God to lead us and inviting us further, and being non-judgmental and viewing the expression as prayer. And if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a bit more about that. We might, as we go into this, really challenge ourselves to set aside self-judgment or shame about our skills. It's not about being an artist, and I'm certainly not art trained. It doesn't matter. Too many of us as a child heard a message that you can't do that, or why don't you go try something else, or in some way heard that this wasn't for us. And to turn that around and say, yes, I can do this. This isn't about producing art for others to admire or to comment on, really. It's about us entering a soul space with God and reaching deeper into our prayer with art. It might be reflecting as we go into this, on a recent experience. It might be just the general kind of feeling over these last weeks and months. It may be something more distant or past that comes to us in our prayer, and it's asking God to lead us in that. But you don't need to force it, and you don't even have to know what you're doing as you begin, but trusting God in the process. And what's important at the end is also sitting with your work once finished and looking at it and gazing at it sort of lovingly, as God is looking lovingly at you. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. The first one, if you go to the next slide, Maureen, thank you. This is something, one invitation is just to take some colors that appeal to you, that speak to you. And you might want to use here, I'm using my non-dominant hand, that's my left hand, and start to take those colors and just put some form on the page. Just play with it. You know, you can be light with this, you can be playful. And then just see what emerges. And for me on this occasion, something in the left emerged, which was a kind of Leviathan coming out of the deep for me. The second example, if you go to the next slide, I started with just a wash of green on the paper. And as I sat with it, the way the light was shining on it, these forms emerged, which I traced over and spoke to me of a particular situation. The next example, thank you, is one that I learned from someone called Doris Klein. And, you know, with all of these examples, you're starting in a prayerful, quiet, searching place with God, but then we're moving to reflect, maybe with the word that arose for you, or maybe another word as you listen and ponder the Bible. But this is a suggestion of something a little different. You start with a piece of paper and you think about, even before you think, you begin to tear. And that's representing something of the tear within, the tear at the soul, the emotional kind of ravaging of yourself. And as you tear at it, name it, give it a name. What is that representing for you? Or begin to ask, you know, what is it? How do I describe it? You might tear a little bit more away. And then take the two sides and put them on another page and just tack them on and begin to use crayon or paint to depict something and relate to your word, to your Lectio word, or to the feelings that are coming up in you. And does it have a title in the end as you do this? The Spirit leads you. The next picture and the final picture will show you an example from Doris, what she did with her picture. It represented something for her on her own pilgrimage that she was carrying, but she was also moving in the picture. And it's important to honor your picture at the end and remember that, to look at it lovingly, to look at what has been emerging for you, to light a candle, to say a prayer, to ask God to help you, to spend time with it, and to just be there in a restful way. Thank you. I'll hand back to Maureen.
I'm just going to continue on the theme of giving creative expression to our lament and the particular focus from Psalm 43 that the Spirit has brought forth in you. And along with images, we can combine words and images, or we experience grief, sorrow, and the shock of loss in our bodies. And so we might want to create a series of movements, or we might want to, sorrow can get stuck in our bodies, and we might want to try and give sounds to it and sound our sorrows. And that's a very beautiful way to approach a psalm as well. So I'm just going to show you some examples of ways people have done combined words or used figure and ground, or what's foregrounded the word that perhaps has come to life for you, and allow the Spirit to sharpen the focus, and then use it as a springboard for prayer. So this is one that's done on Psalm 139. You may have recognized it. So these are the words that popped out, and the prayer emerged, the lament emerged out of Psalm 139. Corita Kent, who some of you will be familiar with, and has a beautiful concept called plork, which is a combination of playing and work to free your 5-year-old, as Catherine invited us to do, and play with colour, and perhaps just allow the word, it might have been the word why, or it might have been the word hope, or whatever, to give that expression with colour and play with it, and then just speak to God, respond to God, and then keep returning to it. Or you may have been, a whole series of emotions and feelings may have been evoked in you through the morning, through your lament, and you may want to stay with one or other of those and give it a picture expression and surround it. It might feel a bit chaotic and not manageable, and there may be ways of trying to contain it on the page. There are some lovely, just simple gestures we were invited to consider for our stilling prayer. We gather, we open, we receive, we give. But you might want to give a sequence of body movements to your psalm and to the particular words that were highlighted for you, or choose some words for the psalm. This is a beautiful one based on the writings of Julian of Norwich. Await, allow, accept, and attune or attend, I think it says. I can't see because one of your pictures is in the way. But just something, simply play with the postures and the words to allow that body movement to happen and create a dance, a sequence of movements. And as Juliet referred to, that our sorrows are not just personal, but they connect with the sorrow of the wound in the world, the sorrows of the world. And this is common in all traditions, to lament, to give communal or collective, to join the collective laments of other groups. In my own tradition, the Gaelic Cíne tradition, there are particular words that are associated with the soundings of sorrow, and the word ocone is a huge, if an older woman is describing, or a younger woman even, that is the lament of the soul. We have the Jewish Kaddish tradition and the mourning rituals attached to that. We need only think of the Wailing Wall of Jerusalem to think about what that collective lament looks like. We have examples from music and sacred music of channels of expression through requiems or poetry. So you may be writing a poem based on, or sounding a song, or a verse of a song, or a line from a song might return to you. So we just want to invite you to dwell in Psalm 43 and see what emerges in the creative expression as the Spirit leads, using any or none of the means we've used, or you might want to take yourself off into the garden and do a bit of planting. Whatever works for you to connect with your lament and your sorrow. Juliet.
Great, thank you, Maureen and Catherine. That was a wonderful introduction. So the time, just checking now, is right, 10:55. We're right on cue. So we're going to spend the next hour, this is your time to create your lament, and you might like to start with Psalm 46 with the word or phrase that stood out for you there as a sort of springboard, or there may well be something else that's really on your heart that you want to express in this way. So the time for you, have a coffee or a cuppa as well, and whatever you want to help you. And we'll be back here again at 11:55 before we move on to sharing something in our smaller groups. So we'll see you in an hour's time.